Hello and welcome to week 6 in developmental psychology, and we are moving away from early childhood and into middle and late childhood. If we look at our timeline in Bright Space, we'll see on chapter 6 we're in middle and late adulthood, middle and late childhood. 2 discussions and a quiz that are going to be due this week. So let's dive into the course book here. Get to the beginning of it. There was an error in the course book. If you go through it, you're going to see that I get into the section of assessment, and then after that there's some other material on moral development, and a little error in editing there. I've caught it, and we'll fix it in the next edition, but there's no assessments particular to that particular content. But read it anyway. It's Kohlberg's work in terms of moral development, and we start to see that develop as a function of the Piaget stages and the way that we start to see thinking. The moral development theory is very aligned with Piaget's developing processes of thinking and cognition. So here we are in middle adulthood. Sorry about that. Here we are in middle and late childhood, and we look at this example here, and I'm going to leave this as it is, but truthfully there's a reason why little kids can't clean their room, and it has to do with the development of concrete operational thinking. So when we get into that in just a second, you'll see that up until about age 9 it's pretty futile to actually have your child organize their toys the way you would clean, and I'll get into that. I'll come back to this area, this beginning of the section, when I talk about Piaget and concrete operational thinking. So we start off the chapter with some basics about physical growth and development. We see that the brain continues to grow, that children are getting taller and stronger. There's more myelination that's happening, and we see that particularly as we go into middle childhood and middle and late childhood is the advent of sports, and how sports start to play, competitive sports even, young children playing competitive sports and learning how to move their bodies and stuff, and that's a really, really important part of development, that children be able to learn to move their bodies in healthy ways, and to enjoy the outdoors and enjoy sports and games and whatnot. And certainly we're starting to see some of the results of individuals who fail to do so, as we have a fairly present problem with childhood obesity. And so there's a graphic in there that talks about how video games and more sedentary activities contribute to an early lifestyle of obesity that leads to an entire lifestyle of obesity, and that we can address that most effectively when we're in childhood, and getting people out, getting them involved in sports. And so a very, very critical part of our role in helping children develop. Now, as we move into cognitive development, we revisit the world of Jean Piaget. Now, in Jean Piaget, the first 2 stages that we've talked about have been sensory motor stage in infancy, and then into late infancy and early childhood we're looking at pre-concrete or pre-concrete operational thinking, or pre-operational thinking, because the internal representations of things are not complete yet. They're developing. And so when we move into middle childhood, we start to see the internal representations start to happen, and the ability to manipulate those things. And this is very important in terms of leading to problem solving, creative thinking, and perspective taking, and the development of those skills as we get older. That keeping in mind when we're talking about operations, we're talking about the actions upon schemas. So reminding about what these schemas represent are concepts that we have. So there's a concept for what is a computer, and that through the process of assimilation and accommodation, that schema becomes increasingly complex. And depending on so we have simple schemas for things we don't know a lot about. We have complex schemas for things we know a lot about. And when we're in an education system like this, we're increasing the complexity of existing and introducing new schemas. So concrete operational thinking is the ability to be able to take those schemas and operate upon them and experiment with them internally. And that's the concept here. Now we usually present the opportunity to practice this by introducing, you've heard it, STEM. And I'm going to add the other one. It's actually the real letters. There's STEM, but there's also STEAM, where we add the A, and that's art, because art and music do this as well. Art and music are very symbolic type exercises that allow for the internalization and manipulation of schemas. So STEAM, science, technology, engineering, math, and art, we've got that art before math there, but those topics and the hands-on type of activities that we see in early childhood education is key to developing, first externally and then internally in concrete ways, the ability to engage in operations. And so the hands-on learning that goes on throughout childhood and that area, that's when there's that expectation for the internalization. But that internalization is first going to be based on concrete reality, things they've done in the actual world. So that's that interaction between cognitive development and the environment that they're in. And so concrete operations have the kids attain some unique qualities to their thinking that put to rest the common errors that we talked about when we were looking at pre-operational thinking. And there's a list of things here. And it also addresses here the notion of why do we have to wait to middle childhood and late childhood before our kids can clean their room? So let's take a look at each one of these areas here. We have this discussion here. Then what does concrete operational thinking look like? And I have 5 areas here. The first is inductive reasoning. This is the ability to make logical connections based on experience. So at this age, for one thing, there's a sense of consequence that becomes a little bit more real. You know, if I do this and my mom finds out, I'm going to get grounded. I don't want to get grounded because there's a game coming up that I want to play in. That kind of thinking, that ability to connect the dots, starts to emerge during concrete operational thinking, because they're able to take these ideas and move them around in theoretical ways. Like, what if I do this? Based on what I know about the world, what's going to happen? And they can connect those things, and that's an emerging ability that starts to come out at this time. So it's around this time that the conversations we have about consequences, that we've been having them all along, but it starts to make sense for them. We've been modeling them before by saying, you know, we scaffold this. I mean, we're pushing the envelope. We're moving into that zone of proximal development, you know, a little bit beyond where they're capable of when we've been having them talk about these consequences before, but now it starts to make sense. They start to put these things together themselves. Classification and decentration. This is actually the characteristic that develops that has to do with cleaning and organizing their room. Now, if you think about the way and I'll use that as an example to explain this, if you think about how we organize and clean an area is not only do we put things where they belong, which is one level of coordination, but even when we put them where they belong, we organize them along other dimensions. So let's just say we're looking at a typical child's room and there's clothes, books, and toys. So we've categorized 3 kinds of objects in there. So books go with books, toys with toys, clothes with clothes. Now before the ability to actually take my stuff and divide it into categories, that's pre-operational thinking. If you ask a pre-operational child to go clean their room, it's all the same stuff. They can't really, I mean, they know books are books and they're different than toys, but if you're asking them to clean their room, it's all my stuff. And so the typical solution is push everything in the closet, push everything, they're just cleaning space, right? Where we're like, what are you talking about? Put the books on the shelf, put their clothes in the drawer, and put your toys in the toy box. That doesn't really come out until the child is able to say, my stuff can be divided into categories of clothes, books, and toys. Now, even beyond that, when we put books up on the shelf, I mean, you don't have to have obsessive compulsive disorder to organize books from the biggest to the smallest. You don't have to have obsessive compulsive disorder to put the little toys in a little box and put the big stuffed animals in another kind of box instead of all together. Until that develops, those are all just ways we can, when we think about it, we take a single item, we can say, this is my child's item. It is in the category of toys. It's a small toy. It's a car toy. I'm going to put it in the little box for car toys. When you're looking at 5 dimensions of organization. And that would be clean like our clean, right? That'd be our way that we would organize. And this is a long journey for young children to get to that level of organizing their stuff that way. That comes around with classification and decentration. Now, centration, again, is that we have classification, but it's because they don't centrate anymore. They're not just looking at one characteristic as the defining quality of that object, like my stuff. It's not just centered on it's my stuff. It's a book. Books go on the shelf, and those books go from biggest to largest. And that areas, being able to divide that means you're moving away from centering on one aspect of that qualitative changes in our experience of objects. Reversibility, and this comes from a lot of STEM activities. Let's say you're looking at that classic test where you have the small, wider beaker and the narrow, taller flask, and you pour one from the other, and it looks like it got more. But when somebody's doing STEM activities and they're doing that for a while, they start to recognize, just through repetition, I can reverse these. No matter how many times I pour this back and forth, it's still the same amount of liquid, even though it's taller and one is shorter. Excuse me. That's also decentration, but they can also then reverse those things in their head. So if they actually experience something in the world, like you're rolling out that ball of clay, another one of those classic ways that we actually experimented with pre-operational thinking, they can sit there in their head and put that ball back, take that snake and put it back into a ball and go, that's the same. They can reverse those in their head. Okay? Then there's conservation. Those things don't change over time, just because you only see part of it, or just because you see they change their shape, or as they view things, that's a door is still a door, even though they might see a round hobbit door, they might see a triangle door, they might see a tiny door or a big door, but they can easily move those concepts in all of those areas. And this is really where like puzzles, like finding shapes in diagrams, like Where's Waldo and stuff like that, that those kinds of things are very energizing as they're beginning to really fine-tune their ability to discern specific things about what their visual stimuli. And then again, another organizing principle is seriation, which is their ability to organize objects along a dimension, if not along multiple dimensions. So let's say in the silverware drawer, all the silverware goes in that drawer, but it doesn't get maybe for some people it does, but not in my household. It doesn't go in all together. There's a thing in there for the knives and the forks and the spoons and the little spoons, and they go into those categories. And so a child who's developed concrete operational thinking actually has the capacity to do that. So and then I go into, as we move away from that, we're sort of introducing the other area of cognitive research, and that is information processing. And this is, again, we have these qualitative differences that are happening in Piaget's sequence of events, and then we have these other measures of learning, such as processing speed, short-term and long-term memory, the attention span, and all these things. These are other things that are changing. These theories are happening at the same time. There's just a quantitative, counting, measured information processing approach, and then there's the qualitative processes that we're getting out of Piaget's theory. So, cool stuff. We see this in language development, communication disorders. I go into a little bit of that. I'd see even that I've covered a little bit of zone of proximal development, helping people move into that area so that they can develop new skills. Then we go into intelligence, and I introduce to this idea because what we see, and we're going to see this when we talk about Erikson as well, is this is the period of time when kids go to school. And intelligence, or IQ, the kind of really kind of classic one, remains important because IQ tests are still a good measure of how well people are going to do in school in terms of scholastic activities. It doesn't measure other skills like social skills or creativity and stuff, but in terms of, basically math and writing and comprehension, IQ is a pretty good predictor of how well someone's going to do in those activities. So IQ starts to, intelligence starts to be an issue. They start to be compared to others. That's where we're going to see in terms of Erikson's theory at this point in life. Very, very important time. And but it's also a good time to look at the emerging theories of intelligence that are alternatives to the simple IQ. Now, the IQ is still used to make decisions such as special services, services for people with developmental delays would have to qualify for those with IQ tests and whatnot. So it's still an important measure, but intelligence has been redefined as more than that, more than just one score, let's say. And we have Sternberg's Triarchic theory, where he looks at three kinds of intelligence. And that's analytical, which is a lot like the IQ test. Maybe you could even take an IQ test to measure that part. Then there's creative, which is experiential and just natural creative ability, to adapt to new situations and stuff like that. And there's practical, and I really like this, the practical contextual intelligence, which is having to do with the thing that you have the most, it's your culture kind of thing. And it's not just experiential, but it's in that particular situation. So there, if you're in a foreign culture, there's a certain intelligence that people have about the way of things that you have to learn. This is an acquired intelligence as you begin to understand what is expected to be able to adapt in an environment that you're not familiar with. So it really takes into consideration those special kinds of intelligences that are contextual to culture or to a person's profession or a person's knack for something. So pretty cool theory. Now the other theory that's I guess even more popular than that is Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences. And so we have these sort of like applications of intelligence from Sternberg, and then we have sort of a collection of things that that under Gardner's work really should be identified as different kinds of intelligence. And each one of us has a degree of each one of these intelligences. So there's the naturalist, there's musical intelligence, logical, mathematical, existential, interpersonal, body kinesthetic, linguistic, intrapersonal, and spatial intelligence. So you look at the descriptions in that chart and say, you might be able to pick out different ways in which you excel, or maybe that's not your thing. It doesn't come naturally to you. It also changes the whole notion of intelligence testing. I mean, how would you test musical intelligence versus logical and mathematical intelligence versus existential? There's no multiple intelligence test. We would have to there would be like a case study on a person to actually explore their in different kinds of intelligences they have, to really flesh out what a person has. That might be an interesting part of the biography assignment, to kind of pinpoint, if you're in the reflection paper for your biography assignment, to pinpoint which intelligences do you think the individual really expressed through the stories of their lives. That would be a really good idea. Okay, so we're moving right along here. I talk about, what is Gardner doing now? Why is IQ still important? And we move into this notion that kids are coming into school, and I contextualize that in an exploration of ecological theory by Yuri Brofenbrenner. And what we see in this particular theory, it's probably one of the most misunderstood, but it's also incredibly useful theories, because what it demonstrates is an individual's experience of the world in context, and how each one of those contexts interacts with each other and therefore ultimately affects the individual. So at the center of this graphic that we have the individual, and the next circle of social interaction around them, that what we call the microsystem, is their family, health services, their peers, and their school. But we're really looking at a part of their world that is interacting while they're experiencing that. It's interacting through the mesosystem, which is kind of like this interaction area, with the exosystem of their neighbors, social services, industry, local politics, and mass media, which is also interacting with, the macro system, attitudes and ideologies in our culture. Now, we don't necessarily progressively just move out. As soon as we move out, as soon as we're born into a family, and those things are affecting us. They're interacting all the way. So the way we raise children is affected by our family and upbringing, then our extended family, on church, our community, and the laws of the land. And, they're just, all of these things are interacting all along. And we become increasingly aware of these interactions and how they affect us. It's really kind of a good model for what we call the sociological imagination that arises in our social identity, as we see ourselves in the context of all of these systems, and we can identify how they've affected us. My attitudes are not just a result of my own explorations, but they're the explorations that existed within a particular context. So they're shaped by that context. So kind of a neat theory to bring in here, because now what's happening as the child moves into the school system, where that school system is under direct influence, let's say, from local authorities and even national authorities affecting that, and how that is a new stage going on in childhood, where the norms, values, and expectations of that child's development are now being considered on a much broader scale, not just the family, maybe not even just the community, but at larger measures of what's going on during that time and the expectations they have of that. And so school comes in, and it's a really significant jump in terms of development, because now the expectations are being compared. Your development is being compared to others. And enter in, I'm going to go right past the hidden curriculum and all that. I want to get into Erikson's industry versus inferiority. Because if we look at the first three stages of Erikson's theory, I want to see how this kind of like transition into school is so important. We look at those first theories of trust, autonomy, and initiative that develop at home, and also in daycare and whatnot. But those are individual abilities, and to the degree to which a person is able to do those things is how willing is the environment reinforce those and keep those things going. Industry is the first one where we're comparing, because look at the other, it's in industry versus inferiority. I mean, you can't be inferior unless you're comparing to somebody else. So this comparison part enters in during this stage of development, where up until now my development has been what it is, and to the extent that I'm compared to my siblings or compared to other kids, it's not that it can't happen there, but as I enter into school, that's what school does. It compares us, it rates us, it grades us, it puts us on a chart, we accumulate stars. Whatever it is that we're doing, we're now looking at ourselves as we stand to the people who are with us, our age mates and other people. We're being compared to their performance. And this is the opportunity really for people to start that pathway of self-discovery that leads to the next stage of identity that we're going to get into when we look at adolescence, and how important trusting the world is, that I can be autonomous and I can come up with ideas and initiatives, and then through the process of industry and inferiority, I start to develop a notion, an internal representation of what I'm good at. And there's that's the platform, the launching point of our first sort of really comprehensive images of our identity, of who I am, because it really is the fifth stage of identity, which we'll be talking about next week, really does refer to our sense of trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry. Do I trust the world? Do I feel like I belong? Am I autonomous? To what degree am I dependent on others? To what degree am I independent? Are my ideas worthwhile? And I'm good at coming up with ideas. And then almost with that, industry, what am I good at? What am I good at compared? Where do I stand in the social circle? And now I start to develop my identity. And you see how clear this is in terms of its progression, and how that's embedded in Bronfenbrenner's theory, that it really only happens as we start to really experience the influence of those other social circles that are outside of our own family. Okay, so that said, I tell the story of Hannah and her jump rope. That's a really neat personal experience I had. And we enter into the inserted too soon assessment area. There's two discussions and the quiz, and then if you keep going a little bit, you'll find all the stuff on moral development. But Chapter 5, Discussion A, one of the things that we've experienced here in this COVID is a disruption. That's Discussion B. Sorry, hold on. Discussion A is school can have a profound impact on a person's sense of industry or inferiority. Discuss examples from your own life and or from your subject. Again, you're going to your subject. Since you're interviewing them already, this is not the same as the biographer, but you're interviewing them, ask them about these things. Is there anything in school, when they were in grade school, that they discovered they were good at, or they were excluded from because they weren't good at it? Those kinds of things, and how that has affected our sense of industry. So your own personal reflections and the reflections of your subject. In Discussion B, we look at how COVID is affecting the stage. It's a concern within the world of psychology, because a lot of this negotiating of status occurs on the playground, interacting with age mates. And as bizarre as that can be, the conflicts and the struggles and whatnot are developmental in nature. They're important that they safely encounter those struggles in order for them to develop a sense of what they're good at. And having that ability to be able to discern what I'm good at and what I'm not good at shapes career development. We're going to see that come out later. We don't want to do things we're not good at. And it really creates a good sense of self so that we can be successful at whatever we do. But here we are with kids out of school, not interacting with their peers as much, not doing that as much competitive type work that they were doing before, not really being as aware of other people's performance, so they can gear their responses to that. And will we end up with a generation of kids, or it's a small subset of a generation of kids who don't have a sense of good industry about what they're good at because it's been truncated, it's been interfered with by these by social isolation. I would imagine, truthfully, not only might there be motivation on the part of teachers to get back into the classroom for face-to-face for the efficacy of teaching, because they're used to teaching in face-to-face methods and those are effective, but I think they may be acutely aware of the fact that the interactions between children that allow them to determine industry are now not as present, and that it's an important quality of their development to have those experiences with other children where they're negotiating on their own terms status and whatnot, both in the classroom and on the playground, how important this time is. Then I go into the quiz. You have described the characteristics of concrete operational thinking and lists personal examples of each one of Gardner's intelligences. What I want you to do is to characterize yourself in terms of where are you in each one of those intelligence. Read up on them and just, it's kind of a long answer, but just cite the intelligence and tell, oh, kinesthetic, I'm really good at that. I've been in dance forever, and I lead dances, and I really feel in touch with the motion of my body and stuff like that. Got that one. Then you move on to all the other ones. Kind of a self-reflection on you regarding each one of those. And be deep thinking about it. Don't just say, I'm not good at this. That's insufficient. There's a level that you are at. Describe the level that you're at. You might not be an expert naturalist, but there you go. So that's my expectation for the quizzes, and you can go ahead and read into the next little section there that's in the course book on moral development, and take a look at how it aligns with the Gardner's with Piaget's theory. Very, very cool. They were contemporaries with each other, and so it's kind of cool to see how their work aligns with it. So that's it for this week, and I'll see you in the discussion boards.